Good morning, I'm Julie Meyer and welcome back to Entrepreneur Country TV. I am the CEO of Entrepreneur Country and I'm also the CEO of VIVA Investment Partners based here in Zurich, Switzerland, and the host of Follow the Entrepreneur Investor Summit. We talk about all of our platforms and properties on Entrepreneur Country TV every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Central. And one entrepreneur was on one of my recent trips to Milan, and I was able to schedule a meeting. Stefano's business, Hyris, is in mobile DNA, and this is a real breakthrough and a game changer as well. So I didn't allow him to accept no and brought him here to Sicily. Stefano, would you please welcome Stefano Lo Priore to the stage to talk about his business. There you go.
Thanks a lot, Julie, for the invitation. Thanks, everybody. We will use this time to speak mostly about food and mosquitoes. So, a question that we usually get when we talk about this mobile DNA analysis is, what's the point? What is it for, right? And most people are familiar with the fact that somehow that there are medical applications about DNA analysis, so it can be used for human health. So we thought in this occasion we would talk about all the other side of the coin, all the non-medical application, making clear that medical applications are there, they're the big market, but there's a lot of other stuff that can be done. Coincidentally, that's where we are more active. Okay, so first layer, everybody's very famous with very familiar with this concept, globalization, goods moving in and out of countries in the world, movements of people, goods of all sorts, right? At this level, everybody is nauseated by hearing about the concept. Well, there's another layer of globalization that's going on. It's the globalization of pathogens. The fact that we are entering environments and ecosystems that were undisturbed in a certain way before, and they were moving a lot of materials around the world and shipping them around, results in the constant emergence of new pathogens and new diseases. It's a feature of the world. Every 2-3 years, a new global pandemic emerges. Avian flu, swine flu, SARS, Ebola, Zika, and so on and so forth. You see that the rate is typically 2 to 3 years to the emergence of the new one. The reason is that there is an almost infinite reservoir of microorganisms in the tropical and subtropical area of the world. They are only waiting to be disturbed. They might have been affected a few tribesmen in the Amazon so far. There's reason why now somebody's building a highway through the Amazon and a whole bunch of microorganisms that never entered the global distribution and travel pathways in the world. All of a sudden, they emerge in other areas. Now, we just spoke about the ones that affect humans, which are the ones that get media attention. The same things happen for animals. The same thing happens for plants. There is a pandemic going on in Italy right now that affects olive trees, that has the potential to wipe out olive trees completely from the country if not contained correctly. And apparently, one of the suggestions about the origins of this pathogen is from Costa Rica. Some seedlings were brought from Costa Rica, apparently, and they infected a small area in the southeast of Italy, and it's spreading out from there. Okay. So, next layer. This is not about pathogens. This is about authenticity of biomass materials. This also has 2 layers. There is outright fraud, and yes, you're reading this right. Fake meat has entered the supply chains. There are a growing number of outrageous scandals connected to biomasses of various sorts, mostly for food production, but in a number of other areas. They are entering food, cosmetic, nutraceuticals, all sorts of chains. But the problem is deeper than that. It's not only the outrageous cases that make the headlines. General estimations about authenticity and counterfeiting of biomass materials for human consumption or otherwise estimate at about 30% of the stuff that we consume is not what is on the label. Twice the tuna is sold in the world than the tuna that is actually caught. Estimations say that between 30 and 30% of the fish served in American restaurants is not the fish that is on the menu, it's something else. So this ranges from let's say, simple, relatively harmless consumer fraud, you are paying for cod and you're being served something else. Okay? Two slightly more disturbing cases, like in the case of protein biomass that is used in a number of processed foods, which for the most part contains by now crickets. Since crickets and earthworms are the two organisms that return the highest number, the highest concentration of proteins compared to the input. So there are enormous cricket farms in China whose purpose is to manufacture protein powders that then, through a network of supplier, distributors, agents of various sorts, find their way into the production of most areas. You will see one of the areas that we're working on is certification labels for vegan and vegetarian food. And a lot of the big food manufacturers in the world are terrified about cricket proteins for some reason. Regulators are getting smarter and they're getting in on the act, and regulations are getting progressively tighter. We are part of the FDA and United States Pharmacopoeia workshop on the genetic plant testing methods. And in general, we see that regulators all over the world are tightening the screws on consumer labeling. The whole trend was started 4 or 5 years ago by the Attorney General in New York, which said all of these products you can sell over the counter with ginkgo biloba, with ginseng, with this, prove to me that this plant, this medicinal plant, is actually present in the product. This activity destroyed several major US corporations. They were not able to prove the traceability and the actual presence of the active ingredient in the product, and ran afoul of US consumer labeling regulations. Consider that all of this can be addressed in some cases with genetic testing of the microorganisms and or of the actual biomass under investigation. But the method so far is, wherever your sample is, you send it to a specialized laboratory and you wait for the results to come back. For medical applications, you're looking at 3-4 days to get genetic testing result. For industrial applications, you're talking about minimum 2 weeks. In some cases, it can be as much as 6 weeks. This is something which is not comparable with a just-in-time supply chain management and production schedule. Okay? And just as a reminder, there is money to be made in this. When I started in this industry, DNA testing in 2002, worldwide market was 1 billion, then became 1.2. We are now looking at a market which will approach 15 billion relatively soon. Okay? It's growing healthily. It's one of the industries that's supposed to grow. Nobody projects that the market is going to be slower. So we look at this chart and we say there is room to grow for a small company. We are now abandoning the world of objective reality, of things that you can all check by yourself, and we are entering the world of our subjectives, hopes and plans and dreams of what we plan to do about this. So we envision a system, a capillary network of testing sites, of IoTs, that allow you to test your samples, whether it's a mosquito in the jungle of Cameroon, whether it's a ginseng plant at the farmer's place in China, whether it's a probiotic strain on a consumer shelf. These are all examples on which we're actually working, on which we have working programs. And it will allow you to test it right then, right there, without having to ship a sample and wait for weeks, in some cases, to get the answer. And this is the technology on which we rely on. The smallest commercially available industrial-grade DNA analyzer in the world, 1 kilogram a cube, 4 inches per side. This is already used at several sites around the world. It's mostly around Europe and North America, and it's being used mostly by transformation industries whose primary input raw material are biologic biomass, whether plant or animal origin, and they use it for quality control, quality certification throughout the supply chain. Some of our clients are using this at ginseng farms in China to test for the authenticity of the ginseng. The result, this machine takes about 2 hours to get the result, between 1 and 2 depending on the reagents. They're testing ginseng in China, in Korea, at the production plant. Machine connects to the cloud via our software. sends the result to Milan, where the headquarters of this pharmaceutical company is. They check the results, they say, it's original, it's authentic. They call the shipping department and say, send the money, call the bank, send the money, let's ship it. Now, every DNA analysis platform is a three-legged stool with hardware, software, and reagents. We do all the hardware, internally developed and manufactured. Software, all internally developed. And the reagents, we both use our own reagents, and we open the platform to reagents coming from other parties which have already developed them. We'll see some of our partners in working at this. Okay. At the very core, what this machine is, it's an instrument to transform a biological sample of some sort into data. Right? We are a biotech company for the first hour of interaction with the client. We're a data management company from then on. The way these machines should be used is through what we call swarms. A client has 10, 100, 1,000 of them over a certain territory, collects data, geotags and timestamps the samples. Each individual machine processes data. They all go on a cloud system. Somebody sitting in Baltimore, in Milano, in Tokyo has online real-time control over everything that's happening and what is happening in their supply chain, on their farms around the world, and so on. What are main applications at the moment? We do a lot of biomass transformation industries, mostly for botanicals, meaning pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and so on, where the active ingredient is extracted from plant instead of chemically synthesized. We do probiotics, which is another huge area of development. Small note about probiotics. I drive a scooter in Milano and I have a helmet. The latch of the helmet is strictly regulated. There is no flexibility on how this plastic latch has to be made. On the other hand, you have probiotics, which are live bacteria for food consumptions, are completely unregulated, right? Nobody has really an idea of what exactly you are ingesting, and now that there is this growing trend to add probiotics because of gut gene health, gut genome, and so on, there is a number of products, juices, fruit, tomato extracts, all of them are laced with probiotics, and this is completely unregulated, and most companies don't even exactly know what these bacteria, what these legacy bacteria are that they're using. Most of them come from legacy industry like wine production, cheese, yogurt, fermentation, beer, and so on, and there are evolutions of these traditional strains, which in some cases they exist for thousands of years. And we'll talk a little about the other thing, disease surveillance networks. We have some good partners here. So we're on the market, we're selling. Sales covered about 50% of our operating expenses last year. We plan to be a break-even or slightly profitable this year. So we're covering all our expenses, all with revenues. Special mention for Indena. This is an Italian pharmaceutical company based in Milano. They're 110 years old. They buy basically forests of plants enter into Indena, and little vials of extracts come out as a product. Okay? They're the first ones who had the problem in sourcing some of this plant material, and we will always be thankful because 3 years ago they were the first ones who believed in us, started buying our products, and later invested in the company. We have now expanded to the next step in the supply chain, and our main clients are the big names of natural health products markets in the US mostly. So the Herbalife, Nature's Bounty, and so on. And most of them are integrating our platforms to do genetic testing of the incoming raw materials in their plants instead of having to send the samples out to external laboratories. And then the new activity that I started this year that is very promising, we just love that, is we have been working very closely with Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, with the Malaria Institute at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and they have tested the machine and they have ported all their test kits for mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases onto our platform, which means you can now catch a mosquito in Puerto Rico, in Cameroon, in Zambia, all real cases. You can take a leg of the mosquito. The mosquito is an unwilling participant in this. And you can put a leg of the mosquito here, and you can determine the species of the mosquito. Very difficult to distinguish, but different species have different activity levels. You can determine whether the mosquito is a carrier of Zika, dengue, malaria, chikungunya, West Nile virus, a whole lot of unpleasant microorganisms. You can tell whether the mosquito has been treated by the Gates Foundation or by Google as part of their mosquito population suppression schemes, which rely on the fact that you take mosquitoes, you breed them in-house. There are mosquito farms in California, verily of Google and the Gates Foundation run them. You infect the mosquito with Wolbachia, a bacteria that renders them sterile, and then you release them in the wild to crash the local population, hoping that the sterile mosquitoes will somehow outbreed the wild ones. The problem is, now you are in Cameroon and you released 1 billion treated mosquitoes. How do you check, right? Where are these mosquitoes? If you catch 1,000 random mosquitoes, are they treated? Are they untreated? Are they malaria carriers? Are they not? Does it make sense to take all these samples, geotag them one by one, and send them to San Francisco for sampling? How much does it cost, right? So this is the project that we're discussing. We're meeting Gates again. We're working with Johns Hopkins, with Gates Foundation, with the School of Tropical Medicine in Liverpool, and with other partners on this, and we are super excited to be part of this. So, let's look at a few numbers. Why would they even consider working with a small UK, Italian company instead of one of the big names? We give them analysis time from the moment you have the sample in your hand, roughly 100 times faster than what you get with traditional methods. The innovation is not in the chemical reaction that happens inside of the tool. It's exactly the same one that happens in the lab. Johns Hopkins stopped using their $50,000 real-time PCR machine, and they have started using ours, $8,000 machine. Okay. NIST did a test on ginkgo biloba identification with several producers, several laboratories. We came in equal or ahead with a lot of other laboratories whose machine costs between 4 and 80 times what our machine costs. Okay. Pricing, in this case, we didn't do as well. We're only 10 times cheaper, typically, than a traditional analysis. An industrial analysis of food or control for, let's say, authenticity of a plant species will set you back about $300 in the US. We sell our reagents at a very good premium at about $22 per reaction. So that's the motivation, obviously, for the Herbalife of the world and so on. Also, it's very scalable. You don't need to invest a few $100,000 in a big lab. You can buy one machine, right? You can buy one. Or you can buy 1,000, depending on how many you need. Then, as every startup company will tell you, we have artificial intelligence. It's obvious, meaning the machine is made to be easy to use. We could train anybody in this room in 2 days, and you would go in the field and run genetic analysis of your samples. Okay? Because there's a software who reads the raw data and automatically interprets them. And then it goes back into the database where all the analysis for mosquitoes or ginseng have been doing in the world, and automatically learns what are the parameters to say it is real ginseng or it is American ginseng. Different story, lower content of active ingredient. So this is our application roadmap. The green ones were the applications we had in 2018. So plant health, the identification of pathogens that attack plants, Flavescens doré, stone fruit, plumpox virus, and things like this. The other one was botanicals, the identification of the biomass, meaning the actual plant that comes into the extraction facility. The yellow ones are the things that we're working on in 2019. I'm happy to say that on botanicals extract, we invoiced the first client, we have the first products. On probiotics, we have for the first 2 clients. I'm waiting for the order from the third one. We're actually invoicing clients on this. I think we have by now 29 kits for plant species identification, and last I checked was 9 kits for probiotics identification, not in different kits. Fish speciation, that's a little bit in the background. We just didn't have time. That's one of the reasons we are raising capital, because we have a lot of opportunities in front of us, but there's only so few of us, and even though we're breaking even, we're not a very rich company. Food pathogens, we just closed a project with the National Research Center in Italy, and we have kits for the 4 main food pathogens. And on mosquito-borne pathogen surveillance, Johns Hopkins told us that they have ended moving all their testing kits already available on our platform. And I hope that sometimes in the autumn, hopefully we'll start in-field experimentation with Gates and the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. The business model is fairly obvious in some way. We tried to take elements of mobile telephony into this. And so we sell or lease the instrument. The economics of making the instruments are very similar to those of a cell phone. There are very significant economies of scale. We hope to grow the scale and to push down the price, where basically the barrier to entry to become a site of genetic testing becomes $99 per month. This is our goal in the medium term. Then we sell the reagents, or we take a licensing fee or a royalty on sales that other producers of reagents do to our installed base. So we try to expand the installed base of machines as much as possible, and I'm starting to sell my installed base to manufacturer kits to say, there is no standard machine in the industry. All of a sudden we have this cheap, very functional, very easy to use machine. Why don't you sell to my client? And I only want 10% of your sales or a royalty license per country also. Probably you all realize that the reason also why we're doing this is that this infrastructure generates data. All data live on our cloud platform. Right? All of a sudden, you are the leader in genetic analysis of ginseng around the world. Right? All of a sudden, you are the leader about mosquito-borne diseases around the world. Right? So this is all done to generate a lot of data with a depth of data, and all the data geotagged, so you can do, for example, Google Map that shows you in real time the movement of, for example, Zika. This. By the way, side note, I never understood why in the discussions about changing climate and warming climate, nobody mentions this, that if an increase in the temperature of the temperate area in the world, North America, the Southern Europe, of 0.5 to 1 degree corresponds to an expansion of the range of the vector, so that you could have Zika in Chicago potentially, right? And this seems to be one of the major factors, and it's very rarely mentioned, right? That the major vector of infectious diseases, the most dangerous animal in the world, if the temperature grows 1 degree, it could arrive to the Alps fairly easily, right? Anyway. So industrial margins, we kept it purposefully, how to say, undefined, but the industrial margins are obviously very good. Both the software and the reagents business, the reagents business is basically a software business. The replication of the reagents once they're developed is almost cost-free. Now, it's difficult to upstage Rudy on patents. He set the bar pretty high yesterday. However, in our small world, we're pretty happy of how the patenting situation is going. We first applied in Italy, and both the machine and the software solution are patented. The European Patent Office just called us and said they approved the hardware patent for Europe, all claims, and it looks like things are going pretty well. We are in the usual dance with the US PTO, but they opposed the same prior art that the Europeans opposed to us. One more claim, one less claim. I'm fairly confident we'll get the US patent as well. And to end it, a small roadmap. We're incorporated in 2015. A group of angel investors, Italian entrepreneurs, mostly connected to the West Coast in the US, that Carlo found, believed in us at the very beginning. When I didn't have anything to show, I was making gestures with my hands and saying, we're going to build this. They believed in us and financed us. Indena took over later, our industrial partner. And now the big news is most of the natural health products industry has adopted our platform, and we're looking to expand into other verticals like probiotics, food control, and so on. As we said, we'll save you the self-aggrandizing expansion plan. Thank you very much.
Really cool, super cool, and I'm really thankful, Carlo, that you introduced us because this is a big play, and I loved how you said this is biotech for the first, and then it becomes a data management company. But the big breakthrough here is the miniaturization, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you? I mean, how does one figure out how to do miniaturization?
Well, you know, I worked for a long time with for ST Microelectronics.
Which also has a facility here in.
Yeah, and that's why I used to come to Catania quite often. And I was in the US, and I developed for them the biomedical business.
Yeah, wow.
And we used to be suppliers, or we tried to be suppliers, basically of all the big US names in miniaturized microfluidics, things like implanted sensors for glucose, DNA analysis.
Wow.
So the Illuminas, Abbott Molecular, Becton Dickinson, all these companies. And while doing this, we realized that there was an application using solid-state sensors and microfluidic technology that would allow us to drastically miniaturize these machines.
Wow. You know, it's interesting because we've been chatting about this whole big company, small company relationship, but so many of the really cool entrepreneurs kind of learn a piece of what they need to know while working for STM. It sounds like you would accept that maybe you wouldn't be here today had you not been working there. I mean, it formed you maybe to see the opportunity or to do it, how to do it differently.
It was a great learning opportunity. Basically, what my job was at the time was to contact them.
Yeah.
We had this huge manufacturing facility for microfluidics, meaning microelectronic component that handles small amounts of fluid. My division was the biggest manufacturer of microfluidic devices. We made inkjet printers for HP.
Wow.
Okay? And so the technology was there, and I would go knocking on doors of all the big US corporations and say, you are ready now to scale up.
Yeah.
As the market goes from 1 billion to 15 billions,
Yes.
you're ready to scale up. Why don't you let us be your manufacturing site? And this allows you to poke your nose into a lot of situations, a lot of technology development, to be part of the team. It was a great learning experience.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Wow. And questions from the floor? Yes, please, Caroline.
So, as you know, I told you over our meal, I'm just fascinated with your company. So, congratulations. My question is about the technology's capabilities, either its currents or potential. And while I think the mosquitoes are, really, really interesting, I'm more questioning about product recalls. And so, let's use lettuce as an example. If you tested lettuce and you found a bacteria in it, rather than having all of the lettuce that's out there at the moment be recalled, can your machine actually detect what type of bacteria and whether it's airborne or it's a type of bacteria that is less likely to have infected the entire farm versus perhaps just 30 heads of lettuce, for instance?
We had just this type of conversation once with some gentlemen from India, about a year and a half ago, about farming applications of bacteria. This conglomerate owned, I think, 20 million cows, and 7 cows were tested positive for bovine tuberculosis. And they told us, we are losing $16 million a week because we don't know if it's 7 cows or 7 million cows. The cows are spread out over an area the size of England and France, right? Mostly in rural locations, hard to get to, and they're like, we would love to have this technology already available at the time to be able to put people on scooters and reach the villages and test the cows one by one before we're forced to slaughter 1 million cows.
Wow, great.
So
Nice.
we'll double team you. So what about the regulatory requirements? You have to do clinical validation. Are there regulatory requirements as like CLIA?
Yeah. That's the reason why we haven't entered the medical market yet. Okay. From a purely scientific point of view, you could do a 510K, a predicate device thing, because there are lab-based devices that do exactly the same thing. Did I mention we're raising capital? That's exactly one of the reasons why, to help with the clinical validations and to look at the medical applications. Of course, from the industrial side, it's a lot easier. A lot of these industrial conglomerates also do not have standards, And that, for example, we were invited, the only European corporation invited to participate in setting the standards with the FTA in the United States Pharmacopoeia for the genetic testing of plants.
Yes.
Yes, please, yeah.
I'm actually fascinated by your technology, and funny enough, I have a call next week with your competitor. Do you know Swiss Decode?
The Swiss Decode, yes.
Yes. May I ask you, sorry to be direct, as apparently you have very, very similar technology. May I ask you, what is the difference between the two products?
Having said that, I want to tread lightly on a company to which we wish the best. I don't consider Swiss Decode a major competitor. It's an isothermal technology, right? Swiss Decode is an isothermal technology, the major advantage of which is having some level of sample preparation for it.
Sample?
Sample preparation.
Sample preparation,
It gets
yeah.
very technical very quickly.
Okay.
The isothermal covers, in this moment, maybe 2% of the market. Swiss Decode will have to develop on their own, with the pros and cons of isothermal, all their kits. Okay? The advantage of PCR is that the world has chosen to use PCR and amplification, temperature cycling amplification technologies.
They use also PCR.
So are you saying that you're smack dab, that you become the de
It's
facto
based
standard?
on a commonly accepted standard.
Right, de
right?
facto.
So when we go to John Hopkins, to
Exact,
the
okay.
University of Guelph, they already have catalogs of applications based on this.
Got it.
And they just need to say, we use it on a lab instrument, let's test it on your machine. But the transfer can take a week, 2
Right.
weeks. okay?
Understood.
They don't need to reinvent anything new.
You know, the kind of position that your business is there one transformational deal that could just completely catapult you into the
Well,
big time right now?
There are a couple that we're discussing.
Double
it's
secret.
bad karma to
Double
mention
secret.
to open.
Yeah.
But let's say there are some very large American-based corporations that have huge manufacturing plants
Wonderful.
that take up to 200 different plant species and different species in, and they are evaluating the possibility of distributing the technology in a capillary way throughout the manufacturing operation. This would be, for us, a big deal at this
Okay.
point.
All right.
And one more thing we can mention, I really like the presentation before us, and we have started working on marijuana as well, and we are working with some of the producers because, of course, let's say the main client of ours comes to us and says, I'm in a market full of bandits. How can I distinguish my quality from the others? How can I communicate my quality to my clients,
Yeah.
right? And make sure that, for example, I sell this specifically developed marijuana strain that has all these good qualities, all these clinical trials with it. And my client, if he wanted to, he could test it himself and prove that that's what I'm selling him.
Yeah, but it's a recurring theme in almost, so many of the presentations that we've had here, the authentication of an asset, right? I think I saw another hand here. There was Druthi right there, because actually, Druthi, this is kind of ish in your space, isn't it? Just why don't we get the microphone? And Druthi, not everybody has heard who you are yet, so why don't you just give 30 seconds on yourself?
Okay, hi, I'm Druthi, and I'm from California. That's where I met Renee and Julie. But my background is in wearable technologies, so I've worked on wearables and mental health, so technologies that can use your physiological data and couple that or correlate that highly with your fMRI brain data to predict perhaps when you're heading into like a manic depression if you have a certain depressive disorder. So it's very personalized based on each person's physiological and mental profile, rather than being like some broad umbrella of mental illness. But my question to you was actually more about the design considerations for your product. So obviously the science has to be very clean and validated, but what were your considerations for designing your product and miniaturizing it, but also in how you like made it look and how you made it accessible to people that you're selling it to?
Good question. I like it. Yeah.
Well, of course, you need to pass a barrier at the beginning to make it accessible, to convince them that you're not wasting their time. Apparently, we were convincing enough with a few early adopters. The early adopters were motivated enough, usually because they were cheated in some way by some supplier. They encountered some significant commercial setbacks. They probably bought some material, biomass, that turned out to be maybe a multi-million-dollar flunk.
Okay.
And so when we met and we told them, we will work together with you, we will give you a way to check easily and quickly and cheaply what exactly you're buying. We found that a few companies at the beginning were very, very receptive to this message.
Because actually, this is part of the supply chain, isn't it, right? Supply comes in, goes, it's got to go through, and the fact that it's mobile means that the supply chain goes out.
Yeah.
And so you don't even have to transfer and say, oops, we have a problem here, somebody's fraudulently putting X, Y, Z. It's just that we test it at site and we say, we don't want it.
Yeah.
You're trying it out, you're trying to get at us.
Or
yeah,
you can test it before it becomes an issue.
exactly.
Right? It started with ginseng.
Yeah.
Ginseng is a huge problem okay, because it's very difficult to distinguish once it's in powder form. It's very difficult to go in the field to test it
Right.
because ginseng fields in China are mined because it takes many years to grow and it's very valuable. So you can only go with a farmer who knows where the mines are, land mines. I
Right,
mean.
right.
And so it's a huge logistical issue. So now they just send somebody there at the point of, at the port,
Yeah,
take some random samples from the biomass they're
Indeed,
buying. They
indeed.
check it, upload the results, and the head of quality in Milano checks it and says, okay, we like it, ship it.
how many of those are in production?
About 100.
How many are out in the world?
About 100.
100,
Yeah.
yeah? And by Christmas?
We'll see. We're
Plan?
optimistic.
Forecast?
Yeah.
What
by
if
the,
we,
by
what
the
if
end
we
of
all want to
next
buy
year-
one? Can we buy one?
You know, I thought we would sell more at a lower price, but for the moment we're selling the first one or two into each of the big companies. So I'm really hoping that next year we'll bring, well, for every machine that we bought first, we want 10 now.
Right.
Because we're distributing it throughout the organization.
Yeah. What's your communications plan? Because you really got to get the message out, don't you?
For the moment, it has been word of mouth,
Yeah.
basically.
No longer
Every client has
you're on
introduced
camera.
us to
Yeah.
some other company, and they have introduced us to somebody else. And so
Good. All right. Super lovely. Really great.
Thank you.
Any other questions? One last one. We got Graham over there. Oops. Yeah, we got Graham. We got one last question, Graham. Wrap it up for us.
Just to give us an idea of the performance of your product, two related questions. I mean, almost every measurement has some kind of error rate. Could you give us an idea about that? And the other thing is, if you're testing a sample which maybe is processed food, which combines many protein sources, is there some kind of limits to how many can be distinguished in one test?
both observations are absolutely correct. Our goal is to be equivalent in performance to lab-based instrumentation, okay? And at the moment, for example, the EPPO, European Plant Protection Organization, gives a stamp of approval on genetic testing. They have error rates, both accuracy and specificity in the range of 98, 98.5%. If you're at that level, EPPO will approve you as a test. And in terms of process materials, yes, the process materials are harder to check, mostly because the DNA might be more degraded and it's harder to extract it than from an intact cell, of course. It means every application is a case on its own. You need to study, but when we come out with a process and a kit, that kit has been validated on a certain substrate, right? And you as a user, you can rest assured that on that substrate it will work. It will pick up the signal if that DNA strand is there.
Excellent. All right. Listen, thank you so much, Stefano, for coming to be with us here at the FTE Taormina. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.